Hi guys! Can you believe it? This is our last regular week of Sunday school, and we're making plans for something special for next week, so be watching your email. In today's story, we get to meet a new king named Josiah. But first, I thought it would be kind of fun to review some of the other kings that we've met so far. Are you ready to put on your thinking caps? Let's go! Do you remember back in March, we were in the book of 1 Samuel, and we learned about a man named Elkanah, and he had 2 wives, and the first wife's name began with the letter P. Do you know what her name was? Was it Panera, Penena, or Panini? That's right, Penena. And his other wife's name was Hannah. Well, Penena had many children, and Hannah had none. And Hannah wanted children so badly. And one day they went to the temple to pray, and Hannah prayed so fervently that the priest there thought she was drinking. But she wasn't. She was praying for God to give her a son. And he did. And she named him Samuel. And Samuel grew up in the temple. Samuel led God's people for many years, but Israel asked for a king. They weren't content with God as their king. They wanted to be like other nations with an earthly king. So God granted their request, and Samuel anointed Saul as king. The people liked Saul. He was tall and handsome. But then things got strange. When it was time for a new king, God sent Samuel to a man named Jesse, who had 8 sons. David was the youngest, but God still chose him to be king. Okay, so after King Saul came Jesse's son, King David. And after King David was his son, Solomon. Remember, Solomon asked God for wisdom to govern his people. After Solomon, about 36 kings and 330 years later, there was a king named Manasseh, and he was evil up until the end of his reign. After him came Amon, who was also evil. And then came Josiah. Now, becoming king sounds great. But it isn't always a happy occasion. Usually, one king dies before the next king is named. And that was the case with Josiah. He became king when his dad died, when he was only 8 years old. Aww. You can imagine that the people thought having an 8-year-old king was a really bad idea. But the Bible tells us Josiah was good, like King David. When he was 26 years old, Josiah wanted to fix up the temple of God. And while they were getting the temple ready, guess what they found? The book of the law. Josiah's secretary brought it to him and read it to him. Guess what Josiah did? He tore his robes. Remember, Josiah was a king. He probably wore really expensive robes. What in the world could have been in that book that made him want to tear his beautiful robes? Well, the book of the law was God's word, part of the Bible, probably the part that Moses wrote. And remember what God gave to Moses? That's right, the 10 Commandments. And do you remember what commandment number 1 is? You shall have no other gods before me. And in 2 Kings chapter 22, verse 17, it tells us that Josiah and his people worshipped idols. And Josiah felt so bad that they were not obeying God's rules. So Josiah, who started out as an 8-year-old king, read the book of the covenant to all the people. And Josiah and all the people promised to follow God's commands with all their heart and soul. Then Josiah cleared all the temple of all the idols and false god statues. Because Josiah listened to God's word became clear to him. God does not bring harsh punishment on him and his people, but forgives them. So the people in our Bible story today were being stretched a little bit. You can imagine that they had to be pretty concerned that their king was an 8-year-old. Do you see this? Can you tell what it is? Yeah, it's just a rubber band. And a long time ago, I wrote on it. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but that's pretty blurry. Let's take a closer look. Can you see what it says? I can't either. It's pretty blurry. Let me see if I stretch it a bit. It says, God is all powerful. It's kind of interesting that when it's not stretched, you can't see it, but when it's stretched a little bit, it makes it much more clear. Sometimes when life's going good, we sort of miss out. Things are kind of unclear. But, like now, when things have slowed down a little bit and we're getting stretched a little bit because we don't really know what's going on, and we really have to rely on God more than ever before, it becomes clear that God is still in control. God is all powerful. We have learned a lot about the Bible in the last several weeks. And more importantly, we have learned a lot about our God. We have learned that our God is real and that He uses unlikely people to do awesome things in His name. And we've learned that He wants us to obey His commands because He loves us. He sent Jesus to die for us and to rise again from the dead so we can live with Him forever in heaven. Now, like I said, we're planning something special for next week, so be watching your email. And we're going to plan some great things for the summer too. So I hope you'll continue to join us and learn more and more about the Bible and learn more and more about your awesome God. Until I see you again, God's blessings.